Hello, and thank you for coming to this HashiTalk. Today, we are going to be talking about importing Terraform resources the safe way, about the procedures that I use myself, and about the different things that I've learned along the way. Before we start, I would like to dedicate this talk to a young engineer who a few years ago imported some Terraform resources, didn't merge the pull request, didn't apply the code changes in main, all while there was a massive production breaking migration happening. The result for that, as that engineer left for the day because it was over 5 o'clock, was that the company web page was now an Nginx welcome page, and his teammates had to sort it out. That engineer, of course, was me. I'm Samuel. I'm a senior cloud SRE for Glovo, and hopefully today I can share some learnings and some procedures that we use to avoid this kind of situations. You can follow me on GitHub, have a web page as well, or just search me on LinkedIn if you want to connect or you have any sort of doubts after this presentation. Without further ado, let's start. Let me go a bit around the architecture that I'm going to be using for this presentation. We are using Terraform Cloud as our remote backend. Terraform Cloud is a solution by HashiCorp in order to have your state there, and it provides some interesting features like queuing in the applies and a bunch of interesting things that we love and use here in Glovo. The approach would be similar if you were using S3 with DynamoDB for the logs or something like that. So everything will apply to you as well, even if you're not using Terraform Cloud as the backend. We use a CI/CD approach. We do not apply things manually, nor should you. As you know, it's a best practice in a DevOps environment to have things automated in a CI/CD approach. For this classical one, you create a pull request. There is a plan triggered, and you can check your plan there. In our case, in Terraform Cloud. In your case, it could be Jenkins. It could be any other tool that you use. And you have the results there of what's going to happen with your infrastructure. Once the pull request is approved and merged, all the checks pass, everything's OK. We merge it, the changes apply, and your infrastructure as a code is implemented. The connection between Terraform Cloud and GitHub works pretty much out of the box, so we don't have to set up all of these things. But as I mentioned, it's no different using different tooling. Now, there is two schools of thoughts, you could say, between applying the changes before you merge or after you merge. In our case, we are using the after merge approach. If you use Atlantis as an example, you may be applying the changes before merging. In this case, this is probably going to be the biggest change for this presentation because we are going to be doing everything after merge. But you can still grasp things from the presentation anyway. The reason why we have after merge is because we personally believe that the main branch should be the source of truth and that whatever's there should be the changes that need to be applied, and nothing should be applied before it's in main branch. But this is a long discussion that would go completely out of scope of this talk. Now, let's play a little game. Let's just say that you've just been hired in a new company and you didn't even have to invert a binary tree. It's amazing. Your first task as an employee is to import a really simple instance that was created a long time ago just through the AWS console. You could use other clouds like Azure or Google Cloud, same thing. It's a virtual machine. Okay, so you have done this in the past. You come from a startup where there was a couple of DevOps engineers or SRE engineers, and you just did the stuff, right? You apply, you do the changes. Now, this company actually has many DevOps engineers, hundreds of them. So changes are constantly being applied in this environment. Well, you just move like you know, right? You do the Terraform init, you do the import. And as you are getting ready to merge your changes into the main branch, the EC2 instance is being terminated. Why? Okay, Let's go into where is the danger of just doing imports as it is. Go for it. There are a number of things that can go wrong when you are performing Terraform imports, and it's really important that you keep those in mind. Those are the basic and most destructive one, resource destruction. If you have a CI/CD approach, changes are applied by Terraform when you merge to the main branch, which means that when you are merging, Terraform will perform a Terraform apply, will check the code that you have there, will check the state file and the real state of the infrastructure, and will match it. Okay, the moment that you are doing a Terraform import, for the state file, that resource exists. So if somebody else merges before you, Terraform will look for the resource there. It will not be there, so it will think that they just destroyed it, and it will. So it's really important to keep this in mind. Fail applies. Now, I'm going to mention this further in the presentation, but Terraform plan isn't perfect. It will not always know all the changes that are going to happen. It will try to advise you. It will try to tell you, okay, this is what I'm going to try to do. This is what I'm going to get. This is what I'm going to apply. But some changes are only known once you apply them. As an example, if you are fetching some data, information, and that resource is not available, Terraform may not know it until it applies the changes. If it cannot apply it, it will fail. And fail applies in the middle of a bunch of resources that are connecting between one another, may provoke downtime into your infrastructure. Maybe there is a certificate that it couldn't grasp, so it will fail when you try to reach the server. These kind of things can happen. So fail applies is another risk that you get when importing resources. For this, we're going to try to minimize the changes as much as possible when we are doing Terraform imports. If I can modify it manually so the Terraform plan doesn't have any changes, better. Engineering frustration. Now, this is a classic one. I'm just creating an S3 bucket. Why should I care that you are importing resources into Terraform? Not everyone understands how Terraform works exactly. So not everyone understands what's the state file, what's a workspace, what's contained within that workspace. For that, we have to be transparent with the team. We have to tell people, hey, I'm going to be applying this affects these resources, even if your resources are not related necessarily with the ones that I'm importing. Culture of communication, of feedback is really important to avoid generating frustration between engineers. And there's the fear of failure. I'm throwing all of these dangers at you. I'm saying, hey, your resources could be destroyed. The apply could fail and bring downtime. It is normal to fear sometimes, fear of just touching the legacy, right? And just saying, it's okay, it can stay there, nothing's going to happen. But it's good to move things forward. Tech debt is a danger all in itself. Tech debt can bring your cost up, it can bring your issues up as well. So it's good that we move. We just need to know the correct steps and perform them in an agile way. Let's try to understand Terraform well before we do anything to prevent all of these dangers that we've talked about. First of all, the tool. Terraform state does not understand branching. It doesn't matter that you are doing things in your branch and then when you do the plan, okay, but if I create a pull request, it's doing apply. And when I'm merging to main, it's doing the apply. That means that these are correlated. Well, not exactly. That is just an abstraction. That is just a way for us to have a workflow to work on. But Terraform state only understands of the actions that is applied to it. When we are running Terraform import, we are changing the state straight away. So that means that it doesn't matter if we are doing things in our own branch, the changes are already there. As I mentioned before, if somebody else merges before you and applies changes to the state file, your import was already there. So for that, It's important that we keep this in mind. The moment that I run Terraform import, the clock is ticking. Terraform plan isn't magic. I mentioned before, I will mention it 100 times if I have to. Don't just think that if it's in the plan, then everything is going to okay, everything is going to be applied okay. We need to limit the changes that are happening in our plan when importing resources. If I can change a configuration in my instance, in my virtual machine, for the plan not to detect any changes, better. The fewer the changes, the fewer the risks. Now, let's understand the surroundings a little bit. This applies especially to Terraform Cloud, so it may be a bit more specific, but if you're using Terraform Cloud, the apply method saves lives. I cannot say it enough. It's one of the best things about Terraform Cloud. There are two methods of applies in Terraform Cloud. The first one is the automatic apply. You merge your changes, the webhook is triggered, Terraform Cloud applies your changes. And then there's the manual apply. The manual apply will require confirmation of the run. So what it will do is instead of just applying those changes when something is merged into the main branch, it will just throw a plan and expect your confirmation in order to move on. This is perfect. This is amazing because what this will help us is if somebody who doesn't understand Terraform or when the plans are just too big, this also happens. The moment that you have massive modules, there is so much going on that sometimes you may be missing a change or a line. But you know your code and you know what you're doing. So instead of just applying, it will wait for your confirmation so you can double check this plan. And then once you know that it's correct, apply the changes. Sentinel, which is another tool by HashiCorp that allow us to have some policies against the plan, not against the code. Remember always in Terraform, the code is not necessarily the change. The change is in the plan. With Sentinel, we can apply some policies there. We can prevent destruction of resources by blocking the pull request if a specific resource is going to try to be recreated, as an example. So I recommend those as well on the CI/CD side, on the checks in your Git code, in order to have everything run smoothly. Split environments. There is not a master advice, all-in-one works all of the time thing that I can tell you here. You got to know your code. You've got to know your projects and what works for your organization. You probably want to split the environments. That's a classical one that I would recommend everyone. Have different state files, different workspaces for your dev and for your production cases. This way, if something breaks in dev, it will not break the infrastructure in production. But then how much to split that when we are talking about projects? When we are talking, do you want to base it on a repository, the state file? Do you want to base it on a project? Do you want to group them by teams? Depends on your organization and your use case. Just do it in a way that the ownership is clear and that it won't affect other unrelated resources, or it will affect as least as possible other unrelated resources if something goes wrong. Okay, now we have all of this information. Let's now do it right. The objective. We want to avoid any unwanted changes and applies in our infrastructure. That is the objective. We want to import our resources, merge all the changes, get them in there without anyone else touching them. How are we going to do this? Following these steps. The first thing is communication and preparation. We cannot expect to do these changes without preparing the code first, without telling our colleagues. This is very important. We need to talk with our teams. We need to talk with the relevant teams that are touching that code and tell them, hey, I'm going to be proceeding with these changes. Please do not touch it while I'm doing it. Or maybe if that is something critical, maybe I need to plan in time and say, okay, I'm going to apply this import in a time frame where no one is really working. Maybe that day I will wake up earlier and perform the changes then. The preparation of the code is important, not just the Terraform code that is going to have the resources imported in, but also the commands to import it. Let me give you an example. If I have an instance, I want to have the Terraform code instance prepared beforehand, and I want to have the Terraform import ID of the instance prepared as well before time. Now, I know there are tools to do this, such as Terraformer, that will create for you the code and the resources. The principles are the same. Either you write the code or not, you want to have the code in your main branch before anyone else apply any changes there. So for this, I personally like to write my own code and have my own structure, but it's up to you. It depends on what works best for you. Principles are the same. Second step, cut the CI/CD connectivity. So we have a CI/CD approach, and that is amazing, that is great, it's how it should be. Now, we really want to cut that if somebody somehow can go over the checks that shouldn't be triggering and merge the changes into the main branch, those changes are not applied into Terraform. So for that, we are going to cut it. We are going to cut the communication. We are going to disable the webhook. We are going to disable the job, whatever it is that makes Terraform trigger and apply after you merge the changes. We are going to stop it while we proceed with the imports. We execute the imports, check that everything's okay, make sure that the infra is okay, so we can run a Terraform plan, see that everything is right. Maybe we can change something, because if there are no changes, I mean, that's good, but maybe it's not so clear to see if we really apply. Personally, what I like to do is I have a build using tag in my resources that is set to manual when I set it manually, and that is set to Terraform in the Terraform code. So for all my resources, I'll have a build using Terraform tag that will help me identify that this is now managed by Terraform. After this is done, we can enable everything back, enable the CI/CD, enable auto apply if we use Terraform plan, run a cycle, notify our peers, we're good to go. Let's now proceed with the demo. Now, for this demo, we're going to be doing something really simple. We're going to be importing an instance and the security group that were created manually in the AWS console. As you can see here, we've got our security group there, and we've got some tags there to know how are those resources being managed. Manual right now, Terraform afterwards. We've got, of course, as well, the Terraform Cloud, which is our remote backend. This is the UI, where we're going to be running all of those changes. We're going to be running those Terraform plan, Terraform applies. And we also have our pull request with the Terraform code that we want to be applying. Here it is, the security group and the instance, of course. There are the tags that are going to be applied once those resources are managed by Terraform. I also have a little helper, a script that I like to prepare with the things that are going to be run with the Terraform imports. With that, first step, communication. Let's talk with our teammate and comment them that we are going to be performing some changes into Terraform, and please do not touch our infrastructure. There we go. Sure, we'll try not to break anything this time. Now, first step, cutting the CI/CD. For this, we are going to go to Terraform Cloud and perform two changes. First of all, apply method, the live changer, my favorite. We're going to make sure that manual apply is selected to the workspace, so only the changes that we confirm are run. The other one, version control. We don't want version control workflow. We want it CLI driven, which means that only commands that we run with our terminal will be applied. If somebody manages to push some changes into the code, nothing will be applied. My script has a little dry mode where we can see the commands that are going to be run there. So we can see there, a couple of imports, everything looking fine. Now, it is really important to know that before we run any imports, we need to initialize this repository in our locals. The import is not run remotely, it's run locally. So we need to have the Terraform minutes, so all the modules are initialized, everything is correct, in order for Terraform to understand which resources are there and which ones it needs to import. Once that is done, we can proceed with the import. State log, first resource imported, everything fine. And the second one is coming. There it is. It is now time to run a Terraform plan locally and see if everything is applied correctly. So let's go to the terminal. We're going to run the Terraform plan there. Remember that we've just initialized, so everything should be good for the Terraform plan to work. If we use Terraform Cloud, this plan is running remotely, but it knows of the changes. Remember, from the moment we run Terraform imports, the changes are there. So that's going to run. Perfect. We can see some changes there. The tags that we wanted to change are being applied. There is also another change right there. If you can see, the root block device is removing a tag. This is fine for us for now. We don't need that at the moment, so we're going to go with it. Then the security group is adding the additional tags that we wanted, and we can see that the reward rules on delete is going to be set to false. This is fine for us, but if we want to minimize as much as possible the changes, we could change that manually in the console to make sure that nothing goes wrong, as we mentioned before in this presentation. I like these results, so I think that we can move on with the changes. We're going to go to all pull request, and we are going to merge it. Merge before apply. Remember, we are using that approach. So we want the code to be in the main branch before we sync everything again and we apply those changes. Everything merged. Let's activate the version control workflow again on Terraform Cloud. I'm going to select my repository. Looking good. Update. Terraform Cloud automatically runs a new run whenever we sync again with version control. So in this case, that run should only contain our changes. Let's make sure of that. It's running. There we go. 2 changes are the ones that we wanted. Let's make sure of it. There we go. Those are the tags that we wanted to change for the infrastructure, for the security group, as well as the instance. All perfect. We can now confirm the run and apply those changes. Changes applied. Now we can go to the AWS console, refresh the page, and make sure that the tags are now applied as a proof that our infrastructure is now managed by Terraform, as we want. Everything good. Let's go into the security group as well. Refresh that. The name is already there, and the tags are already applied. Everything is good. We've imported resources securely. Now, we've got to set everything back together. We've got to activate the auto apply again as it was selected before. We've already activated the version control workflow. So the only thing missing is notifying our teammate that everything is good to go again. We do. Okay, let's now go back into the presentation. I want to give you some key takes away from today. For any safe import process, you want to know your system. You want to know what you're working with. You want to know the game. Once you know your system, you know your environment, you know which changes apply where. You want to communicate. You want to tell your teammates. You want to do this process in a moment that it's not critical for the organization. If you are in the process, cut the CI/CD chain. Make sure that if something goes wrong, if you skip a check, if somebody can push, nothing is going to be applied, and you will be able to roll that back before any changes are applied into your infrastructure. Once you got everything done, you can import securely and you're good to go. Thank you very much.